Hello and welcome to the Indo-German Business Talk, hosted by the Indo-German Center for Business Excellence. My name is Matthias Catón. I'm the Deputy Chairman of the Center, and today I will be your host. We will talk about the automotive sector in India and Germany, and specifically about the move towards a greener automotive sector. And to do that, I have three excellent guests, experts here with me. I will introduce them shortly, and also the topic. Germany and cars are two things that are very, very closely related. World famous brands such as Mercedes, BMW, Volkswagen, Porsche, everyone knows them. It is one of the most important industries in Germany with those big car manufacturers, but also obviously with a lot of supply companies that some of which are well known, such as Bosch, for example, but many, many more medium-sized companies that contribute to this ecosystem. Likewise, in India, the automotive sector is important and increasingly so. It's one of the largest in the world today, both when you look at the production side, with also brands that are well known, such as Maruti Suzuki, for example, Tata Motors, or Mahindra and Mahindra, but also as a market, so as a place to sell cars and other vehicles. Both countries share a history. Many of the big German car manufacturers have a long presence in India. So that is, I think, what makes the topic quite timely and also quite interesting. As I said before, we will not just look at the automotive sector per se, but we will look at it from the angle of the green transformation. And the automotive sector worldwide, not just in India and Germany, are faced with important questions: technological transition to greener systems, e-mobility, and so forth, and so on and so forth. And we will discuss these things today. And with that, let me move on to our panelists. We have two that are connected virtually, and one guest who is on location here with me in our studio. And let me begin with Rajesh Nath. Welcome, Rajesh. Great to have you. You are with VDMA, as we can see by the logo in the background. VDMA is the German Engineering Federation, and you are the managing director in India. And which people may not know when they hear German Federation, German Engineering Federation, is that you are a big player in India as well, with more than 600 members alone in India. And I think that is quite remarkable and tells you something, I guess, about the size of India, for one, but also about the depth of the economic integration between our two countries. So welcome, and we're glad to have you. Next is Marius Ochel. Welcome. Marius is from another very important German association, the German Car Manufacturers Association, or I think Association of the Automotive Industry. That's the way you translate it. VDA in German. For those of you who are familiar with German economy, they know that there is really one of the most important industry associations with a lot of weight in Germany, given the importance of the sector. And Marius is the head of Cluster International Association Partnerships, Africa and India. So that's a long title, but obviously people will understand immediately why you are here. You are in charge, among other things, of the relationships with India. Welcome. And then finally, here with me in the studio is Alena Glanz. Alena is, hi.
Hi, thanks.
Alena is currently a PhD candidate at RWTH Aachen, one of the most renowned and best technical universities in Germany. She has experience as a product manager for a Korean automotive company. And she's also been involved with supporting German automotive manufacturers in digitizing services from a telecommunication perspective. And that, I believe, is also quite interesting because I mentioned the green transformation, but there are obviously also other technological transformations that are happening in the automotive industry today, including digitalization and the appearance of new players that somehow have started encroaching in that sector. So I'm very interested in hearing from her. And finally, she's also an alumna, I have to mention that, of Frankfurt School of Finance and Management, where we are based here and where we're also streaming from today. So welcome also to you, Alena.
Thanks.
Good. Let's get into the topic now. And I mentioned automotive industry, both very important in India and in Germany, but also the connection between both sectors. So let me turn to you, Rajesh. Could you maybe, for the people who are not as deeply familiar with the sector as you are, explain to us how does that work? How is the connection between German automotive manufacturers and Indian producers? How long has it been going on? How deeply are they integrated?
Yeah, thank you, Matthias, and good day also to my co-panelists and all the viewers who have tuned in today for this panel discussion or for this web meeting. Matthias, coming to the relationship between Germany and India is quite old. In fact, it has been in existence, and we also celebrated 70 years of diplomatic relationship between India and Germany. I would say the automotive sector in India plays an important role for the Indian economy because the contribution of automotive industry to our GDP is presently about 7%. And if we look at the GDP of India, we are at about $3.2 trillion. And the larger aim of the Indian government, Matthias, is for India to become a $5 trillion economy. Initially, we had the deadline was set for 2025. And I think with the pandemic, things have got extended. But we are hopeful that at least 26, 27, India would become a $5 trillion economy. Now, the automotive sector in India, I just go a little bit back to the history. Actually, if we look at the 70s, we just had that in two suppliers. One was the Indian company Ambassador, and then the other one was this Fiat Padmini. The Fiat was very much like the Trabi. It looked very much like the Trabi. And these were the only two suppliers, and one had to have a waiting period of about 1 year, 8 months to 10 months to 1 year to get the car once you ordered the car. It was something like, I remember Henry Ford's statement, you could buy a car as long as it is black. So you did not have much choice on the color you wanted. There were standard colors and you had to buy. And then we had, I think the big change was when Suzuki came into the Indian market. They really revolutionized the automotive industry in India. And these two companies, which had 100%, or I think Ambassador had a share of about 70% and Fiat had a share of about 30%. And I think within a short period, Suzuki really took off in the market, and our original car companies actually struggled then after a few years. The German automotive industry were a little late entrants to the Indian market, Matthias. But now, yes, we have all the major brands are present in India. Mercedes-Benz is there. We have Volkswagen is there, Audi, we have BMW also, and all of them are actually also assembling in India. And they have also customized the models more for the Indian market. For example, in India, it is quite normal to have the cars with 4 doors, what perhaps the smaller end cars in Germany or the entry-level vehicles in Germany or Europe are more used to the two-door concept. Whereas in India, it's normal to have a four-door concept. So they have to modify the designs also to face the market. But yes, the German manufacturers are making good strides in the Indian market. It is still a luxury brand, so the number of vehicles sold are not so high. This year, it has been an exceptionally, or 22 was an exceptionally good year, Matthias, for the automotive industry. In fact, they had the passenger vehicle sale of about 3.8 million, which was a growth of about 22% if we compare to 2021. So the industry is quite buoyant. I think the German automobile manufacturers are also quite upbeat about their presence in India. And I think it can only grow better with the passage of time. Yeah.
Thank you, Rajesh. Let's move to Marius. We've heard a little bit about German car manufacturers already. From your perspective, from the perspective of German car makers, is India nowadays more important as a production place or as a market?
Yeah, thank you very much, Matthias, and hello from Berlin, Germany, and greetings to our co-panelists. I just have been in India until last week, Monday, for the Auto Expo, so actually my current, let's say, experiences are pretty fresh. Thanks for having this panel. And maybe for a start, just some words on the VDA. So actually, as you said, we are the German Association of the Automotive Industry, consisting of 600 members or more than 600. And what is very unique about the VDA that we compare OEMs and suppliers and also trailer and body manufacturers. So this is at least different than in India. There we have ACMA as a component manufacturing association and SIAM as a OEM or manufacturer association. And yeah, just some maybe like a little bit key facts about the German car industry. So actually we have an annual turnover of 410 billion euros. And what is actually quite interesting that the German car industry is, as many as you know, very, very much internationalized. So even more than 75% of the production in Germany are being sold abroad. So this is also coming to your question, why India is an important market, for sure. It's an important market, and also many of our production is sold over there. But as Rajesh also said, that the market share of the German OEMs is still pretty low. I think it's roughly between 2 and 3%. So actually it's I would say there's still potential to even increase this. But if you look at the other side, there's when you look into component manufacturing and supplier industry, it's like massive investments of German companies, and they are like highly and deeply rooted in India. So just, I mean, Bosch, I think last year they celebrated 100 years operations in India. So that's quite a very long and very successful story. And what is quite interesting, just to give you like a little bit comparison amongst various markets, as Rajesh said, 3.8 million passenger cars were the sales last year, which is like very, very much increasing when you just compare it to the last years and decades. And the same applies for the production in India. So also there it's increasing. And when you compare it to the like biggest markets, which is still China, there is an annual sales of 23 million cars, and in the US it's roughly about 14 million, and in Europe it's 11 million. So you see that India, it's growing, and the role of India for the international car industry is even getting better and better. And this is also kind of, I mean, the government in India, they also did quite some important steps the last years, as many of you might know, the Make in India Mittelstand program, for example, or even this whole Make in India program. Then they have some subsidies for the electric mobility. They just introduced a couple of years ago the so-called FAME scheme, faster adoption of manufacturing of electric vehicles. So even there they invested heavily in, for example, electric buses. So this is a very important thing which is going forward. And another number is that we just couple of months ago, we counted the production locations of German companies, car companies and supplier companies in India. And this is more than 120. So you have this, you have the automotive, let's say, how to say it, hub in Pune, then you have production in Bangalore, you have Aurangabad from Audi. So there's various kind of production hubs. And another interesting fact is that you see that it's not only the production or even assembly of cars, that it's like a recent trend is more and more the IT and digitalization centers. So supplier companies as, for example, ZF and Bosch, they have set up like own technology centers to even make use of the highly skilled Indian IT labor. So yeah, there's really like a digital hub has been developed. I have a lot more what I could say, but I think from the first.
Okay, that's good. Now we'll come back to you
maybe I just stop
as
over
a resource on facts and figures. But thanks also for putting this into perspective. I'd like to turn to Alena, because you mentioned digitalization, Marius, a couple of times, and that is one of the topics that you are passionate about, that you've worked on. So we've heard a lot about some of the well-known traditional German and also Indian car manufacturers, but there are some people who say that next generation car manufacturers will actually not be the BMWs, the Volkswagens, the Mercedes, but it might be the IT companies, might be the Apples, the Googles. What's your take? Are we facing a major transformation where new players may take over, or will we still hear from the old established brands in 10 or 20 years?
So good question. Thanks for having me here. Actually, when thinking about the big IT companies like Google, tech companies, definitely there is an increase in interest in the automotive industry. So I can definitely confirm that. However, what Marius and also Rajesh already introduced us is a long history and a good partnership between Germany and India. And I guess what we see is that these companies have gathered a different knowledge on the markets, and that knowledge gives them an advantage in these markets. So let's say Apple, Google, and so on, IT companies, tech companies, they'll have to catch up on this knowledge. So probably there will be a rise in seeing those companies, corporates in India. But personally, when it comes to knowledge and capabilities, these companies, German automotive companies and Indian companies, have worked together in the last couple of years pretty closely and shared these insights. And I guess that is definitely an advantage that will have to be combated for by these big tech companies. So, and maybe to add to this is also from RWTH Aachen, what we see is entrepreneurship and startups. They are becoming, they're on the rise when it comes to sustainability, to electric vehicles, to solutions that big companies are not really able to tackle by themselves. So I think that is a different perspective, and maybe different players we should consider when looking at the Indian automotive market.
Good, thank you. Let's talk a little bit about green transformation. This has also been mentioned, and this is obviously a very, very important and hot topic. Marius, I think you mentioned that there are incentive schemes by the Indian government. So let's maybe start with that. What do you think? Who has a leg up there currently? Is it Germany or is it India when it comes to green transformation of the mobility sector?
I think it's definitely both nations and countries, because actually when what we really see right now, I mean, there was the last couple of years, there was always talking about transformation, but now you can really see it happening. I mean, I have been just at the Auto Expo of Siam and ACMA, and even in the Auto Expo Motor Show, there was an own pavilion just talking about methanol, hydrogen, electric cars. So you really see that the green transformation is going to happen. And if you also saw the number of cars exhibited, which were electric cars, then you also see that maybe kind of the incentivization of the government is successful in some way, that also the market ramp up of the electric cars in India is successful. And to maybe just give you one example from Germany, what we see, how the production declined from the traditional combustion engine and was then somehow switched to the battery electric cars and plug-in hybrid cars. So this is like a really recent trend. So at least the annual production of electric vehicles in Germany has more than quadrupled from the last 6 years. And even in the combustion engine, it has shrinked. And yeah, what we can see in India right now is that they plan to invest a lot of money into hydrogen. And this is not just only the government, this is also the companies. I mean, the Indian government, I think last year they released that they want to invest 2.2 billion euros for hydrogen projects. And then the industry, they committed themselves as wanting to invest 100 billion euros in the next couple of years. Germany and India, they just recently, when there were the Indo-German governmental consultations last year, they signed let's say, memorandum of understanding for further cooperation on hydrogen. And I think India really wants to aim to become like a hub for green hydrogen technologies and also export at the end renewable fuels, e-fuels, e-kerosene to the rest of the world. So you definitely see transformation happening right now.
Rajesh, what is your take? And maybe also, if you could talk a little bit about the different technologies that we've heard now, electric vehicles, hydrogen. Is there one technology that you believe will end up playing the biggest role, or is it like a mix of several technologies?
Yeah, interesting question, Marius. And Matthias, and thanks, Marius. I think you gave a good overview. Matthias, maybe I'll just, before we start, I'll share some statistics on the electric vehicle, because as Marius mentioned about this FAME, now India is certainly pushing the EV penetration, because the penetration of electric vehicles is very low in India. And the government, through these FAME scheme, there was the FAME 1, then there's the FAME 2, actually, which came to an end in 2022. But the government has extended it for another 2 years. So basically the government is giving incentive if anybody is buying the electric vehicle. So there's incentive being offered by the government. And under the FAME 2, I would just like to share these statistics. I think these are very interesting statistics, that the total outlay was about 1.4 billion euros under the FAME 2 scheme. And there was almost 0.8 million vehicles to benefit of this incentive scheme. And the total incentive that was distributed, this is as per figures till December 22, this was about almost 400 million euros was distributed. And there's a very interesting that the average incentive distributed per vehicle was around 509 euros. So the government is going, or the aim of the Indian government is that by 2030, we want that 30% of the vehicles are e-vehicles. Now, certainly there is, as you mentioned, we are talking about pure electric vehicles, we are talking about hybrid vehicles now. As Marius also briefly mentioned, I think that's going to be a big game changer, is the scheme of the Indian government with this national hydrogen mission. So India wants to go big on the green hydrogen, Matthias. And this is a huge project from the Indian government. In fact, almost it's 2,300 million euros. That is the allocation for this project. And this would help to create, I would say, of course, one side is the energy concept, we would get green energy, but also India is looking for the job creation, which is so important in our country, because we have almost 1 million people entering the job market every month. And this is a big challenge for any government, is how do you provide jobs or employment? So under this, there is a scheme of almost, it's about 600,000 jobs that the government wants to create. And the aim is that around 5 million metric tons by 2030, we want to start producing green hydrogen. Now, certainly green hydrogen would be utilized also in our transport. And let me just come, Matthias, to our, if it's okay with you, just the urban mobility factor, because it's a very important factor for India. If we look at when we got our independence, Matthias, we had only around 17% of our population was living in the cities or in urban areas. Now, with the passage of time, this increased, I think, around, it became in 1991, this became about 28%. So basically, from our independence to today, which is in 75 years, now it has become 38%. And the way we are going, I think by 2040 or 2045, one can't say because this migration towards the city is happening so fast now, that almost 50% of our population would be living in the cities. Now, that's a huge challenge because we are talking here about 1.3 billion, 1.4 billion people, and if 700, 800 million have to live in cities, it's a huge challenge. And so that's why our whole urban mobility is a big topic in India. How do you have the connectivity? How do you have multimodal transport systems? And then with the increasing population moving to the city, you have to provide transportation. Of course, there is going to be the emission factor. So this whole concept of electric vehicles or green hydrogen is so important for us because India wants to we want to have nil emission by 2070. Again, a tall order, and we are also looking at almost about 50% renewable energy generation in the next period by 2030. So from our total energy mix. So these are huge challenges that face India. But one thing is good, if I just conclude with that, Matthias, is that the government has very clear policies. The guidelines from the government are quite clear. And I think if we are following these guidelines, it's a good vision that the government has to help to cater to these challenges. And I think green hydrogen, as Marius mentioned, is huge investment, not only from the government side, but also private players. Like we have the huge conglomerate or the enterprise companies, Reliance, they have already committed huge amounts to green hydrogen. So all these will help India as we move towards having a more, I would say, a more efficient mobility solution.
Interesting, and I think the green hydrogen part is fascinating. As far as I understand, in Germany, I think at least in the context of the automobile industry, it doesn't play that much of a big role, at least not in the public discussions. It's very much focused on electric vehicles, e-mobility. But I think one of the things that are very interesting, Rajesh, what you mentioned is that it's not just about cars, it's about mobility. And it also has to do with societal trends, urbanization in India, of course. And I think everyone who has been to India recently can confirm that both from the pollution side, but also from the traffic congestion side, that has very severe repercussions, the rising number of people living in urban areas. But I think it's also a cultural change that we're also seeing here in Germany. Alena, traditionally, at least in Germany, the dream of the average German has always been to own a car, to have individual mobility through car ownership. That is, I don't want to say a fetish, but it has been something that has been as a kind of a cultural beacon. Now, with the rise of car sharing opportunities, maybe the advent of self-driving cars, what we see is some kind of a shift also, especially with younger people. In your opinion, do you think that we will still want to own cars, or will that become increasingly a thing of the past?
Good question. I mean, you're asking someone who is maybe already very enthusiastic about cars. So I don't know whether I'm the perfect person to ask that question, though. Definitely car sharing is a service that younger people take advantage of and use continuously. However, I think when it comes to sharing in urban life, it's also something that would probably be applicable for the Indian market as well, not only for Germany. When it comes to the question, which engine should be in that car for, probably car sharing, I guess hydrogen is a solution that makes sense for public transportation, though we know that the same challenge applies to hydrogen, meaning that why and like how do we implement these different charging or charging stations? I just call them charging stations because also for hydrogen, you need specific stations that are difficult to implement. I've worked for a Korean car manufacturer which is already has invested into hydrogen cars, and there I was able to see that it comes down to these basic challenges. How do you make sure that these, let's say, public transportations, whether it's a small car or a big car like a bus, how do you make sure that these cars are able to be recharged? So you have to implement an entire charging chain before you're actually able to benefit from those solutions. So again, back to public transportation and car sharing, you have to have an infrastructure where these solutions can be actually used. And I think that is a main challenge and probably something that the Indian and also German government can work on and support in order that younger people, like you said, myself, are actually able to use that service.
Is there a difference? Because you need infrastructure regardless, right? You need it for charging electric vehicles. You will need it for hydrogen. Is it more difficult to set up an infrastructure for hydrogen refueling? Does it work like gas, or how is it?
It is definitely more difficult because it is related to some specific security topics that you have to ensure. So it is more difficult than compared to electric charging stations. And on top, we're talking about a urban area, meaning that where do you place those stations, right? And the same also applies for electric vehicles, meaning that you live in a city and you have, for example, an electric vehicle like Mahindra Riva introduced, the E20, and you have to be able to charge that car, meaning where do you live in a building, let's say 10 stocks. How do you ensure that these young people and families are able to charge their electric vehicle? But the same goes for hydrogen. So I think without the governmental support, like we can see in Germany, it is difficult that there is a movement from the younger generation towards these solutions. Definitely it will be something they're interested in, but there has to be a first step in introducing those services.
So the role of government is key, I understand, in introducing in particular infrastructure for recharging or refueling. Rajesh, when it comes to technological advances, I mean, of course, e-mobility has some severe limitations, as far as I understand. First of all, the capacity of the batteries is limited to different extents. Charging also takes a long time, at least compared to traditional refueling with gas. I was at IIT Madras in Chennai last year, and one of the things that they showed me was a department where they worked on battery cells and innovative new ways to come up with batteries that have higher capacities. Do you think we will see innovation there, maybe also innovation made in India in the future?
Yes, surely, Matthias. I think there's going to be a big change, or there's a lot of good work happening all around, because after all, the limitation of e-vehicles is because of limited range, what you can cover. That's why there is always hesitation in the people to buy electric vehicle. And I think a very valid point also what Alena mentioned was the failing or not adequate infrastructure for electric vehicles, and especially in India, we have this issue. I think a very valid point Alena pointed out is because in our urban cities, we have these multi-story houses. And in fact, I recently read in the paper in Bangalore, somebody wanted to install the points, but then since it was in the basement or the basement area, the charging points, there was this fear of fire. And in fact, they could not ultimately install the charging points. So these are the challenges in India we are facing as a country because of some infrastructure limitation. But yes, the government is working in a big way. And we have also, there's a very interesting Indian company which has come up with the concept of battery swapping. So it's like a kiosk, you go with your battery, put the thing and you pick up another battery, put it in and drive away. Of course, this has just started. It's all in the initial phase. How far it will be, adaptability of various batteries, the safety issues, one has to look into it. But there is a lot of R&D happening all around. And in fact, some of the German manufacturers have come out with vehicles where they are talking almost about a range of somewhere around 600 to 700 kilometers. So that is certainly going to help, because in India, even I think with our traffic conditions, because always it is under the kilometer is given under ideal circumstances. So our running of vehicle is going to be quite far from an ideal circumstance. So at least we'll have the challenge of 25-30% less because of the prevailing traffic conditions in India. But yes, I think certainly there is a lot of work going on there. And of course, another point one must mention, Matthias, is also the startup culture in India. In fact, the startups are very buoyant on this point. And as many of you may have read, India has more than 100 unicorns now. We have a very buoyant, and I think very good that we have, as it is, we have a young population, a population which is very much inclined towards IT. And I think this is really playing a good role in the various changes that are happening or the betterment for the e-vehicle industry. And I think with the concept of traditional R&D centers, the company R&D centers like Mercedes-Benz has a huge setup here in Bangalore. They're employing, I think, more than about almost 6,000, 7,000 people. So augmenting the traditional structures, we also have the startup culture, which is really giving a boost to the development that is happening. And I'm sure with the passage of time, slowly, of course, the infrastructure limitations would have to be dealt with the government. Without the government support, we cannot. The changes would be technology-wise, that once you have a charging station, maybe you have a fast charging possibility. So you charge in 45 minutes or 1 hour or 2 hours, you can get the full charge rather than the traditional way of 6 or 7 hours. So that is where the technology will come. But I think it will be hand in hand, as Marius also mentioned correctly. I think government and technology together can really help us to move forward, Matthias.
Excellent. So this is the Indo-German Business Talk. So we don't just talk about India and we talk about Germany, but we also want to talk about ways in which both countries, the economies, the businesses in both countries can work together. So we have about 4 or 5 minutes left in this segment of our session. So I would like to spend that to discuss these a little bit. Where are the strengths and the weaknesses of both parts? Where do cooperation make really sense in order to advance this transformation to a more green or a greener automotive sector, a greener mobility? Marius, what would you suggest?
Yeah, thank you very much, Matthias, for the question. To the discussion before, just to give you one example, because the challenge is immense also for the government to ramp up the electric mobility. So in Germany, we have the goal of 1 million publicly available charging points by 2030. And right now we have the status quo of 51,300. So you see, there's a lot to go. And right now we have this for 1.15 million e-cars. So actually, also this is quite quite a tough challenge to do so. And the same applies for India. I mean, also there, the public charging stations just started to take in place. But if you ask me where we can cooperate, for me, it's definitely the trade section. And for this, we are very much happy that EU and India, they just restarted the negotiations for the free trade agreement last year. Now already the third round has been taken place, followed by another one in March. And India last year successfully launched free trade agreements with Australia and the United Arab Emirates. Currently, they are negotiating with UK. And then after UK might be finalized, we hope that the EU-India free trade agreement will happen, because this will definitely boost the trade of modern technology, highly technology cars and supplier parts for Germany and for India, vice versa. So we are from VDA very much convinced that a trade agreement, free trade agreement between India and EU is very much important. And another thing is to cooperate. This also goes along with the harmonization of standards, because currently our members are also facing some non-tariff trade barriers with India, meaning like technical trade barriers. And if India and Europe come closer together also from the standard harmonization point, this will definitely boost everything when it comes to new technology and support the business.
Yeah, I think there is reason to be at least cautiously optimistic about the free trade agreement, although I think there is still a long way to go and probably many obstacles that we will face. Alena, what would be your suggestions? Where do you see increased opportunities for cooperation between India and Germany?
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite impressed about what Rajesh just mentioned about the entrepreneurship culture in India and about the 100 unicorns. So personally, I believe reducing the barriers for startups and entrepreneurship, I guess, is maybe also one way of tackling these challenges together. So meaning that maybe reducing barriers for German startups and Indian startups to cooperate and working on these topics, I think would be also an important way to move forward.
Thank you. And Rajesh, you mentioned a couple of things. I suppose that you also support what Marius said about the free trade agreement. At least that would be my take, that VDMA's official position is also in favor of that. Is there anything else that you would like to highlight?
No, I think there's a lot of good work going on between both the countries, Matthias, and certainly also when we look at the Indo-German Energy Forum, I think the Indo-German Energy Forum is also doing a lot of good work on the energy sector. Trade is doing well. Also, bilateral trade is doing well. I can speak from the machinery sector, Matthias. The export of German machinery to India in 2022 increased by almost 28%. And what is good is it's not trade in one direction, but we have also quite a healthy increase of export of Indian machines or components to Germany, which also, in fact, would cross the 1 billion barrier for the first time. I think it was in 21, we were at about 930 million. So we are this year with the growth, I think it's also growing at about 24%. So the 1 billion mark would be covered for the first time. So I think it's a very healthy bilateral trade that exists between India and Germany. And I'm sure as we go ahead, also with the efforts of both the governments, I think this is, and of course, government from one side, but among the industry also, there is a good bit of understanding. And I think together, we can really look forward to a very robust, healthy trade between the two countries. And I'm very optimistic that this can only increase as India is on a good path of growth. We are forecasting a growth of about 6 to 6.5% for 2023 also. In 22 with about 6.5%. We are the fastest growing nation presently. And I think this momentum will continue. I'm very optimistic. I think it's going to be India's decade. So surely that is the positive part of it. If not the century, at least the decade it's going to be.
No, I agree. I think it's an exciting time for India, but also a lot of opportunities for Indo-German cooperation in the automotive sector, but also other industries, some of which you represent, Rajesh. I would like to thank the three panelists, Marius, Rajesh, and Alena, for their contributions so far.
Thank you very much.